What's up, Baylor family? It's Thursday, August 15th, and we are only 16 days away from the first football game of the 2024 football season. Welcome into Inside Baylor Sports, the official daily podcast of Baylor Athletics. Cole Barber here with Grayson Grunhafer, and on today's shows, we are breaking down everything you need to know about Baylor football's wide receivers and tight ends. A year ago, the tight ends probably would have had their own show, Grayson, but we felt it was probably appropriate to combine these two as things changed a little bit. So, Grayson, I think to kick us off, I'm just going to say I'm probably going to go with Ketron Jackson in that I'm pretty excited about this new offense and these guys getting a few more touches. The tight ends are still going to be used, but it's going to be look a little bit different than it was in the last few years for Baylor fans.
Definitely. I mean, this is going to be kind of all about the pass catchers, right? It's not really just about, blocking tight ends or, using those guys to really just influence the run game a lot. There's going to be a lot more variety. You're going to see tight ends, flexed out. You're going to see tight ends in the slot. I think it's going to make this just such a interesting dynamic because the guys that they have in that tight end room were brought in for a different scheme. And so now it's going to be interesting to see how they kind of adapt to that. I'm very excited about these receivers. We're going to talk about quite a few of them. I have some interesting nuggets on quite a few. And, Ketron is obviously one that for sure stands out in that room, as does Monterey Baldwin, who feels like kind of a forgotten guy. And then, of course, Ashton Hawkins, the transfer they brought in. Yeah,
so with this group, senior heavy. I mean, they went all in on the senior class. They wanted experience. And I would say, you look at the last 2 years, and that was the one thing they didn't have at that position was experience. And now they've got it all. It's pretty top heavy. So you're talking about Ketron Jackson, Hal Presley, Monterey Baldwin, Jamal Bell, Ashton Hawkins, all as seniors. They have a lot of snaps under their belt. They've combined for 400 career receptions, 5,000 yards, and 31 total touchdowns. So tons of production as a group, but none of them really have had that signature breakout season as you would like to see. They've been around. They've done. Ashton Hawkins is probably the only one that's really had that at Texas State. He had roughly 900 yards and a few touchdowns, but not one of those guys that just makes you say, man, these guys are going to be really good, and this is the bell cow.
Right. I think that would be a fair take, but I would also say that I did a little bit of digging on Ashton Hawkins just to kind of dive in a little bit more. Yeah. And I think I didn't realize he only played in 9 games in 2022, which was actually a season with Jake Spavital. That was his last year at Texas State. But the big takeaway is he was on pace for 81 catches, 848 yards, and 12 touchdowns. If that were the case, if he brought anywhere really close to that, double-digit touchdowns, 800 yards receiving, I mean, you're talking about a borderline all Big 12 type guy. I mean, those are really good numbers, especially the touchdowns, which for a guy his size, you wouldn't expect. Now, things changed for him later in his career, but I think that 2022 season is really the glimpse of potentially an alpha in this offense, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think most reliable, probably we're going to get into that. I have a couple questions for you about what this group looks like. But last year he did it in GJ Kinney's offense. Baylor fans kind of saw that firsthand with what he did in that game, but he really did it all season with 874 yards and 3 touchdowns. So he's put 2 good back-to-back years at a lower level. But I look at these guys and just they look the part and they feel the part. But when we talk about their careers and what they've done, Ashton Hawkins, we covered him, but can this particular offense unlock them? I mean, we've seen what Jake Spavital has done in the past with receivers in his schemes. I mean, really it goes back farther than when he was just offensive coordinator, but when he was a quarterback coach at West Virginia. And all of his stops, he has had the opportunity to get playmakers the ball at the receiver position. So can this offense unlock them? And will this group be able to bruise? I know there's a lot of factors that go into that, but is this the offense? Is this a good fit for all of these guys? You look at especially the guys who are returning that were at Baylor last year.
Right. And I feel like this is a conversation we've had a lot this offseason. Just kind of when you look at the roster, positions that you feel really good about, and based on the track record and the talent that they have and what they brought in, it feels like the wide receiver position is one of those positions that is kind of due for a breakout. I think it's also fascinating and something that maybe we didn't talk about enough, but Dallas Baker is the only returning guy who was coaching offense last year for Baylor.
Yeah.
That's a big thing as well. There's clearly some trust there in kind of what he's building, despite the fact that that group has really struggled the last 2 years. I think they revamped the room. I think they've developed guys probably at a much higher level. And I just think, you look around at the different body types, the different skill sets. I do think this group has a chance to be really special.
Yeah. And I want to touch before I get into these few questions that I have that I want to both of us chime in on. But Monterey Baldwin, you called him the forgotten piece, and I think that's appropriate to a great extent. I think even Ketron and Hal, I think they're forgotten because and you use that word, kind of loosely, but I think that we didn't see them get the targets that they typically would have in other systems. So you say, man, they just didn't have the production. And I read that on the Sikkim 365 forum somewhere that like, who is the playmakers at wide receiver? Well, I think there's plenty. I mean, we've seen what Monterey can do with the ball in his hands, get him in space and let him make plays. We've seen what Ketron can do down the field. Even Hal making plays he's done it his entire career. You go back to 2022 and he's done it. But I think in general, all of these guys, they just need targets and they need the opportunities. And when you talk about a staff that last year, they wanted multiple tight ends. If there was 3 tight ends, if they could have gotten 4 tight ends on the field, a lot of times they probably would have. But if they had 3, it was pretty regular. And that took snaps and opportunities away from these receivers. And so I think that in general, the entire returning group is a little bit forgotten.
I agree with that. I think that, one area for all these guys that they have to improve on is consistency. And you can boil that down to targets. That's fine. But also, you have to look at just the game by game sample size. And guys like Ketron Jackson had, a few really good games, but then you also dive a little bit deeper. He had 3 games where he had under 10 yards receiving. Yeah. That's just not good enough. That's not impacting the game at all. And those are games where he had targets. I think the one that really stands out was UCF, where he just could not get open against the UCF cornerbacks. And so I think that's a kind of another thing I think we need to look at, because Ketron, Hal, and even Monterey, and Monterey's is mainly due to, it feels like, injuries has been the thing that has always kind of set him back, nagging injuries as well. So I'm curious if this is the year where they have more consistency. Maybe that boils down to more targets. Maybe that boils down to being in a more offensive friendly type scheme. I'm very curious about that, but I do think they have the pieces, I think, in place to be successful throwing the football and racking up some yards and points.
Yeah. So we talked about the transfer, Ashton Hawkins, another transfer, Jamal Bell. He's coming in super fast. He's speedster, twitchy. He's played running back in his career in times that he's needed to. But if you go back to his recruitment in high school, he was a guy that had offers. He ended up at Nevada, but he had offers because of his talent and everything that he could do. At Nevada, he was a great kick returner, and he's going to be very versatile. So you don't look at him and say, yeah, he's coming in to start by any means. I think there's guys ahead of him clearly. But I think when you're talking about a group that's going to run a lot of receivers out there, he's very valuable. And then you talk about kick returns. He set Nevada's, career return records. I don't remember his exact yards. You might have that in front of you. But he's valuable in so many ways. And I think they went after guys who could fit this scheme. And he's one of those guys who just fit the scheme. And if he's only providing depth along with kicking, returning kicks, that's a massive upgrade, massive potential for this roster.
I think a huge area where he's going to have an impact is in the screen game. I think they're really going to try to get him the ball in space and let him make people miss and then turn on the jets. He ran a 4.49 official laser at the opening during his high school recruitment. That is very, very fast. Yeah. Right. So lots of speed. And when you turn on the tape, it's very clear. He's very fast. Like you mentioned, Nevada all-time record in kickoff return. So I expect he's going to have a role in that regard as well. It's been interesting kind of watching him. He's played some in the slot. He's been out wide a lot, but it feels like right now he's kind of trending towards being an outside receiver for Baylor, but also kind of a flexible option who they're going to move around, try to get the ball in space, and then hope that he can make some plays from it. I don't believe he's the most polished route runner or anything like that, but as far as a dynamic weapon, I think he can absolutely be that, and he can definitely run by people as well.
Yeah, and I think the good news with this particular offense and Jake Spavital's background is that he's going to get guys the ball in their best positions to succeed. And not that the previous staff of Jeff Grimes didn't do that, but I think it was so much running back centric that guys like Monterey, guys like Jamal Bell, even Ketron to a great extent, weren't always, the focal point of getting touches in best positions to succeed. Follow Baylor Plus and Sikkim 365 today on X, Instagram, and Facebook, and sign up for the new premium content bundle. For the monthly price of $17.99, a $5 per month savings, Baylor fans can access the full offerings that both platforms offer: the long-form storytelling, video, and all-access behind-the-scenes content of Baylor Plus, and the premium news, analysis, and forums of Sikkim 365. Sign up today on either platform.
Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast, leave a review, and tell your friends about us. Catch Colt and I on Inside Baylor Sports every weekday. You can also watch the video version free over at BaylorPlus.com or the official Baylor Athletics YouTube channel.
I do want to talk about these three kind of categories. So I've referenced them to you before off the air. I'm going to start with this one. And who in this group do you see being the most steady in this offense? And obviously, barring injuries, what can happen, you never know. Someone, rises to the occasion on a weekly basis. You never know if it's a different leading receiver. But who's the most steady that you feel like you can rely on out of this entire group?
I feel really good about this one. I think this is definitely going to be Ashton Hawkins. We mentioned kind of what he did with Jake Spavital in 2022. I mean, he was a target machine, was on pace again for 81 catches, was a great red zone threat as well, had 4 100-yard games, including 13 catches for 114 yards and a touchdown against Baylor in Waco. It's really interesting because last year he turned into more of a down the field type guy. He averaged, I think it was like 16 yards per catch, but with Spavital in 2022, it was 10.5 yards per catch. And the prior year, it was 9.5 yards per catch. So I do think he's going to be that short area target. He's going to have opportunities in the red zone, but I do think they're going to kind of look for him to get first downs, and in crucial moments, I think they're going to look his way to give him the football and allow him to go make a play one-on-one.
Yeah, so I knew you were going to say Ashton, so I had a second one, and I went with Hal Presley. And I think watching him through his career, last year he was hurt, but you go back to the 2022 season, and he was really kind of coming into his own. I mean, he could get vertical, make contested catches, but he could take screens, so a few bubble screens, and get 10 yards. And if you go back and watch this film, really from early last year, they were using him in that way. And in times when they say, well, it's 3rd and 9, 3rd and 8, let's get the ball to the perimeter to Hal, because he's a little bit bigger, a little bit more physical, and he made plays. And I think in this particular offense, you don't expect him to average 15 yards a catch. Kind of like you mentioned with Ashton, he's going to be put in positions to make catches. And I would say with the understanding that Ashton is also this, Hal is going to be pretty consistent catching the football. Just based on what we've seen, his drops could step up this year and become an issue, but we haven't seen it in his career yet. So I'm going with Hal. We just got to see how he can really recover from that injury.
Right. And that's a big question. He just also has been so inconsistent just as far as, and part of that is target volume as well. But I will say last year, I guess I didn't quite remember this, but in the first 2 games last year, he had 8 catches for 155 yards against Texas State and Utah. And he ended up with only 222 yards because he got hurt, but he didn't play very well in the games after that. And so I found that to be rather interesting. One question I had for you, Colt, do you remember why he didn't redshirt in 2021? Because I'm like,
yeah, I mean, he and Monterey
play very much.
Yeah, he and Monterey both were basically depth guys to that team. They basically had their three or four top receivers, And then they basically got Monterey and Howell reps and let them kind of get used to it. So I mean, looking back, they needed receivers, but that was a tough way to go about it, because you're looking at
Right.
juniors this year rather than seniors, and that's huge for their careers. But yeah, absolutely good point to make. I both of those guys could, if you're looking at them going into their junior years, off their sophomore years, you feel much differently about both of them
Right.
and where they've progressed. So, okay, with that, this one's pretty easy for me too. So I had to come up with another one, but most explosive
Ooh.
receiver.
Yeah. Okay. So do you want me to take the obvious one and then
Well,
you'll
if
go
you
with
have,
the
I would
not as
love to take
obvious?
I would love to take the obvious one just because it's easier to talk about. But go, I mean,
Yeah.
you feel free. I mean, I'm asking you, so
I think I'm going to go with Ketron Jackson. I think
okay.
that last year when we watched Ketron play, there were moments where he really flashed winning deep down the field. And those type of throws are going to be there in this scheme. They're going to take one-on-one shots down the sideline. They're going to give him chances to make plays over the top of coverage. But the thing that we didn't get to see from him last year that he really showed last fall and in the spring before the season was his ability to catch the football and then create yards after the catch. And we didn't get to see that at all really last year. And so I'm hoping that in this offense, they're able to feature that more, because I got to tell you, before the season last year, that was the trait that everyone was raving about with him, was his ability after he caught the football. We just didn't see it. He became just kind of a one-trick pony where you throw the ball deep downfield or you run a slant. And that was basically it. And so I'm hoping this year there's a little more variety there. And if that happens, I think he can create a lot of explosive plays, whether, again, it's one-on-one coverage over the top or in design type plays where he catches the ball short and then creates some yards after that catch.
Well, if you watch Spav's offense, he does a lot of those quick throws to the sidelines. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm with you though. I mean, if you watch Ketron's interview with 365 Sports from Big 12 Media Days, and they asked him about the offense, I mean, he just lit up. And he left Arkansas that was running a very similar offense to what he's going to be running here. He left for his own reasons, but he went to a different scheme. But now he's back in a scheme that he felt very comfortable in. And if you go back to his sophomore year, and he left, Arkansas didn't want him to leave because they believed he would have been a top 2 receiver last year for them. And then moving up into his senior year would have been a guy that was going to blow up. And very similar schemes. I'm with you. I mean, he just hasn't shown it all on tape, but I think he has a lot more to his game than we realize. So I'm going here with the obvious one is Monterey Baldwin. I mean, if you have 98 speed on EA Sports college football, like, you can move, and they're just not giving those out. But what I think probably similar to Ketron is his yards after the catch. Like, get this guy the ball in space, man. Like, you watch that UCF game. Why are they not doing that every single game? Like, that's more of my frustrations of the way that the last season went. But he's a guy that I think you don't have to make him make the tough catches. He's small, but he's strong enough to break tackles. We can throw it vertical to him, but get it to him in space too. And let his speed do the rest. And I think he's probably quicker than we realize as well. He's had trouble with his drops and everything, but I do believe that this offense, just like Ketron, can get him the ball in space, get it to him quick, and just let him go to work. Because safeties are going to be playing deep on him. They're not going to be playing up on the line of scrimmage, especially if this offense can show that the other guys can make plays.
I agree with that. I think the one thing with him that's going to be fascinating is, are you going to have him occupy the same space as Ashton Hawkins? Because I do think that a lot of what Monterey is going to do is going to be over the top of the defense, which is super intriguing because he's looked great in those type of situations deep downfield. But you are right. I think when you have that kind of versatility to, throw the ball to Ashton Hawkins or throw the ball to Monterey short in the quick game, you're putting a lot of pressure on opposing linebackers and secondary guys to go out and make a tackle. And that's something that is really, really intriguing. I think that's going to be a fascinating thing. And I think Monterey definitely has an opportunity to have his best year at Baylor. And at minimum, he's going to be a guy who has, 16 and a half yards per catch and 600 yards. I mean, you kind of know what you're getting with him.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I will say too, with a guy like Ashton and Monterey, going back to your point about Ketron. If those guys can take any attention from the safety, Ketron's going to have one-on-one opportunities. They're not going to want those guys, specifically Monterey, to beat him deep. And he's going to be able to, if he can flash that at all at the beginning of the season, and then you throw in potentially Finn's or Sawyer's feet that they didn't necessarily have last year with Blake, and things it just changes the dynamic for everyone. So with all of that, best chance to be all conference. Baylor didn't have a guy that was even in the discussion last year. I don't even think in 2022, I don't know if Hal would have been the guy that would have had that chance, or Monterey. I don't even think they were honorable mention. But this year, who's the one guy that you think has the best chance? And this might go hand in hand with your most explosive or most steady, but which one would you say of the group would you say would be the most likely?
For me, it's definitely Ashton Hawkins. This all comes down to a bet on him just understanding this scheme better than any of the other wide receivers. I mean, the fact that they're going to run so many option routes makes me think that, okay, you really, there's going to be some nuance to this. You got to be able to read the defense, read the coverage, and be in sync with the quarterback. And I think Ashton is going to bring that to the table. The other thing that I think is really important with Ashton Hawkins' game, and why I really am intrigued by that 2022 season, is how many times he scored touchdowns. I think that is where he kind of differentiates himself from Ketron and Monterey and Hal, is that those guys haven't been able to find the end zone consistently, especially in the red zone. And I think that's where Ashton could really impact things, because he's very good at one-on-one jump balls when you're inside, the 10-yard line, inside the 15. I think that's an area where he maybe will take the edge. And by scoring a bunch of touchdowns, you give yourself a chance at making all conference.
Yeah, and I think we can go back and talk about the offense all day, every day, and the changes. I'm hoping that all of those guys are put in better positions to make plays. And you think about getting into the red zone, you do have a potentially quarterback with good feet to score the ball, but who are they going to attack in the red zone? Who are they going to go? Who's going to be their big playmaker? And then with that, let's transition to tight ends, because I think there's at least one guy that you could really talk about becoming that red zone target. But I watched some film of the 2023 season, and I mean, I started at the beginning, just kind of going through the offense only before we started this, and just forgot, man, like how many tight ends that they really used. And then you lose Jake Roberts to the transfer portal. I think his understanding is like, man, like this is completely different offense than what I signed up for. Maybe I'm not going to get as many touches. If they could have put 12 players on the field, if it was legal, they would have put 5 tight ends and figured out how to make it work. Like, that's just my belief. Like, they wanted to muck it up as much as they could. And when it worked, awesome. When it didn't work, it really did struggle. So what do you see with this offense how are they going to use these guys? And we'll get into personnel in just a second, but let's talk about how they're going to use them first, and what you've seen at practice and elsewhere.
Well, I mean, I think a place to start is, Jake Spavital last year got a freshman tight end and had a lot of success with him. I believe his name's Jack Indries at Cal, and he was really, really effective and really good. And the common theme here is I feel like receiving tight ends are going to have more opportunities to shine. And that's why you go out and get a guy like Michael Trigg. Obviously, there is some nuance to this. They probably wouldn't have gotten Trigg if they were able to keep Drake Dabney, who ends up transferring to TCU after him having a career year last year. But they go out, they get Michael Trigg, who has really had a rough go of it, had all kinds of talent, was a top 150 prospect in his class, but goes to USC, 7 for 109 and a touchdown in 6 games. 2022, 17 catches for 156 yards, 3 touchdowns in 7 games. Then last year, he only played in 3 games. And so it's just one of those things where it's like, okay, what are you going to get out of him? But it's clear when you bring in a guy like that, you're looking to take advantage of mismatches, and you're looking to really involve the tight ends in the passing game. And so I think that's what you're going to see from Spav, working across the middle of the field, working them in the screen game a little bit, working them on, I also think working them some on the outside as well. And so that's going to be something very intriguing to watch. They're going to try to get guys the ball in space, especially these tight ends, and Michael Trigg is a big part of that.
Yeah, so he's the lone transfer of the group. Offensive line, running back didn't have any, quarterback brought in a transfer, but for tight ends, he was the guy they brought in. They looked at a multitude of them, but the high upside is there. I think that they looked at him and said, I mean, it could be boom or bust, right? But if it's a boom, it's a big boom, probably bigger than anyone else they could have had. And so I'm excited. I mentioned him, I think, in our first episode as like he could change the dynamic of the season for the entire team because of his ability to create miss. I mean, you throw him on the field with Monterey and Ashton and Ketron and Hal, like who's covering who at that point? And I know that's getting ahead of ourselves because we don't really know what the potential for all those guys are, but he just creates matchup problems. So returners, Kelsey Johnson, Matthew Klopfenstein, Cody Meladinka, Hawkins Pauly. Of those, and sorry if I butchered all of your names, Grayson's much better than this than I am. But of those four guys, the two that stand out right now are Kelsey Johnson and Klopfenstein. And how do those guys differentiate themselves from Trigg, and what are they going to do compared to the other two?
So Klopfenstein to me is going to be kind of your 1-for-1 with Michael Trigg. Like I think he's a direct backup. I think their play styles are very similar. I think the way he's going to win is receiving. He's not a great blocker yet at this point in his career. Solid. Part of that is because of the coaching that he got when he initially got to Baylor. But Klopfenstein's a really interesting prospect. His last 2 years in high school, he had over 1,100 yards and 16 touchdowns. So he's a receiving threat. And so I think he's probably going to impact the game in that way. Kelsey Johnson is going to be your consistent sure thing. I think he's your best all-around tight end. He's the guy who's going to go out, block for you, play H-back, play tight end, potentially play fullback. You can hand him the football if you want to. He's done that before. And then he's going to go get you a first down. He's going to make the tough catch, the catch where you get hit across the middle of the field. And that's invaluable in my eyes to this offense. So I think kind of how I would break it down is when Baylor's looking to really throw the ball a lot and attack down the field and kind of attack coverages, I think Michael Trigg is going to be the guy they go with. But I think in their consistent base downs, if they're trying to run the football, trying to kind of be diverse, I think that's where Kelsey Johnson is really going to thrive. And then Klopfenstein, I kind of view as the next guy up, as well as Gavin Yates in packages when they're trying to run the football.
Yeah, I didn't include Gavin on this list. I for whatever reason, I excluded him. I guess you just listed the scholarship players. But yeah, he has a role. I mean, he was at at the media availability the other day with the tight end. So he's absolutely going to play a role. I'm intrigued by the group. I don't know that they're going to make or break how good this offense would be. I think they have plenty of capable guys there. And I'm really anxious to see, like, Spav he's going to adapt to his personnel in a lot of ways. And I think that's part of the reason we really don't know what this offense is going to look like this season. What are the strengths of his personnel? Who is going to show up for them regularly? Because I don't think at this stage, if a guy's not going to be, if he's not consistent in practice or in scrimmages or in the class, like, can you really rely on him? And this staff can't afford that. So I'm excited to watch, two tight end sets being the probably the max that we get from that group outside of rare occasions. Let the other speed guys work. But I do think they have an importance. And I mean, as we saw with Cal last year under Coach Spavital, I mean, a good receiving tight end. And truly, I think if you look out through his career, he's been able to use them when he's had them. And I think this roster has them.
They definitely do. I think the other area that's important to mention is when you look at Baylor's depth chart and you look at the slot options, it's Monterey, Ashton Hawkins, and then it's probably maybe Jamal Bell, and then it's true freshman Jaden Porter. So you really do kind of need your tight ends to work in that role quite a bit, honestly. And so I think they're going to lean into that. If one or two of them can emerge, that would be great. And we'll see if they're able to do it. But I do like the talent that they have in that room.
Yeah, ideally, if Michael Trigg can come in and play some slot receiver for them, I mean, the mismatches that he creates, you watch his film, he has the athletic ability, not necessarily of a guy like Monterey, but if you try to line up him as a tight end on a linebacker or a split out, it's going to create problems. And then his size over his safety, it's a mismatch waiting to happen, and that's why he was recruited out of the portal. So, all right, Baylor family, that's going to do it for today's episode of Inside Baylor Sports, the official daily podcast of Baylor Athletics. Thank you for listening, and make sure you come back for tomorrow's episode when we talk about the offensive line. We're really excited about that group, and speaking about that group, obviously the season really hinges on that. So appreciate you guys listening. We'll hear from y'all soon.